Hello! Recently, the shortlist for the 2025 Goldsmiths Prize was announced, so I want to talk about the books up for this year's award and why I'm so excited about it. And this prize has a fantastic tagline to it, which is fiction at its most novel. I would characterize the books that this award highlights as experimental. Now, I think the award quite consciously doesn't use that particular term, but instead they say that the award aims to reward fiction that breaks the mold or extends the possibilities of the novel form. Now, something that so interests me about this particular prize season is the judges for it, because three of the judges are writers whose books I've read and really admired before, so I respect and really interested in their opinion. They include the chair of judges, Amy Sackville, who wrote a novel called Painter to the King, which was so fascinating, such a really different kind of historical novel, and Mark Haddon, who of course wrote the very popular book The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, and Megan Nolan, who wrote the fantastic book Ordinary Human Failings, which I read last year and I thought was so fascinating. And also the fourth judge in the group is Simon Okati, who wrote a book called The Future of the Novel, which I haven't read, but I assume by that title that he is very qualified and interested in looking at the form of the novel and the future of it. So really interesting group of judges. Now, the winner for this year's prize is going to be announced on November 5th, and the winner will receive £10,000. And these are the 6 books on this year's shortlist, and quite an interesting group. There's a lot of debut novels here, which is very unusual for this award. I think 4 out of the 6 are debut novels, and also a lot of these stories concern individuals who disappear under quite mysterious circumstances. That seems to be a strange theme going through this book, but rather than writing about them necessarily in a kind of thriller type way, that there's a lot else that is going on beneath the surface. And I've currently read 2 of these books, so I want to go through and discuss all of them now, but I would love to hear if you have read any of these books and what you think about them, or if you're interested in reading any of them now. First, there is the novel that I just finished reading, and which is so good. We Pretty Pieces of Flesh by Colwill Brown. And as I talked about recently, I was slightly hesitant about going into reading this book because of the vernacular of the Northern English vernacular that is used in this narration. But I personally found it very easy to comprehend and follow this story of 3 girls and how it traces their friendship over a long period of time, from their adolescence to their adulthood, and a reunion between them. So they specifically come from the city of Doncaster, and they grow up together, and we follow sections going backwards and forwards in time, sort of starting with their teenage years, when they're kind of going out and partying together and having quite a wild time together, but then it traces back to their adolescence, how they first became friends, and then finally follows through to a reunion that takes place between them in their adulthood, when their lives have kind of splintered apart and gone in many different directions. And how this traces the mechanics of friendship itself over a long period of time, I thought was so empathetic and really fascinating and beautiful and moving, but also their particular stories, how each of these individual girls are going through their own issues, some of which they discuss with each other and some which they keep to themselves, and how this is revealed over time, the secrets and issues that they're dealing with, and confess to each each other, and how it covers a number of issues to do with eating disorders and relationships and professional aspirations of economic inequalities, but also the larger environment of this story, but does so in such a creative way in its narrative of a narrative voice that moves between the first person and the third person. There's an incredibly heartbreaking section in the second person as well, and how this narrative style adds to their own sense of themselves and their friendship of these girls as a unit who are so strongly connected to each other, but also divided in a number of different ways, and how it portrays their particular stories alongside a growing understanding of the environment around them in the north of England and its history and their place within it, and changes within that environment over time, changes that take place in Doncaster on the high street, but also to do with the local population and a rising drug abuse. And yeah, it's so well done, and I just completely fell in love with this novel. Nova Scotia House by Charlie Porter. This novel follows a character named Johnny, very close to his perspective in a kind of stream of consciousness style of writing, and how he forms a relationship with a man who's much older than him named Jerry. So when Johnny is only 19 years old, he meets and falls in love with Jerry, who's 45 years old, so more than 25 years his senior, but they form this really tender and close connection with each other, partly because Johnny is introduced to an entirely different way of living as a gay man than he had understood or conceptualized before, of an existence that is very radical in its very life, that he enters into a kind of commune, artistic commune, that his partner draws him into, and how this completely changes his outlook on his life. And so sections of the book move backwards and forwards in time between his relationship with this older man, and then much later in his life when he himself is close to the age that his partner was when they first got together. And his partner died due to AIDS complications. And so it's looking at the legacy and impact of AIDS upon the queer community, but also changes within the queer community over time. And so there are aspects of this novel I really appreciated. I thought parts of the stream of consciousness style really worked in certain sections, and then in other sections it didn't work quite so well. It felt more affected. So yeah, there were certain parts where I felt like it was really capturing the conflicts that were going on inside him, and then other parts it just sort of felt like it was there because that was the style in which it was being written. And I really appreciated how this looks at the history of the impact of AIDS on the queer community and within the larger country of Britain at the period of time, and how there was an AIDS quilt in the UK, which recently was brought back, partly in help with the author's help. It was publicly displayed at the Tate Modern in London, and I went to see that, and I thought it was really powerful and moving going to see that. And so I was so glad that the author brought this back into the public's consciousness. Now, I had some other niggling issues with this story as a whole, especially to do with the enormous age gap between these two characters, and not necessarily that, there are relationships that between people that have a large age gap, and they can be loving and supportive and wonderful, but because it flashes forward in time in this character's life, well, in the present time, that he is at a much older age than when he first got in this relationship, and a relationship which only lasted for a few years because his partner died, and how there seems to be so little reflection on the difficulties that can come with such a large age gap. And also it feels like the character of Johnny, he hasn't really developed over the years. He's still just himself, and we follow him as he's just kind of drifting around and trying to maintain this more kind of radical queer life that his partner had introduced him to, and having hookups with people. And it's not that I had an issue with the sort of melancholy nature of it, because it is quite melancholy, but also it has such a downcast look at modern queer life, which, yes, as a gay man myself, I can say there's lots of superficial aspects to modern queer life, but there is also lots of excitement and vibrancy to it. And I feel like the story just sort of completely ignored those aspects of it. And also the ending of this book, I won't give anything away, but I just feel like it didn't quite work for me. So it's a book that I felt very mixed about overall. Now onto the books that I haven't read yet, so I'll only give brief descriptions of them, but I'm really interested in all of them. So there is The Catch by Yrsa Daley-Ward, and this is a novel of twin sisters, Clara and Dempsey, and their mother vanished into the Thames. And these sisters are very different from each other. One is a celebrated author and a public figure, and the other is lives as a recluse and is very glad to have a very reclusive life. And as they become adults, they're kind of glad not to have anything to do with each other. But a woman who says that she is their mother approaches them and tries to reconnect with them. And one of the sisters believes that she is their mother, and one thinks that she is a fraud. So there is this tension between them, but it explores this larger issue to do with how these individuals own who they are and express that to the world. This is the author's debut novel, but she's previously published a collection of poetry and a celebrated memoir. The Expansion Project by Ben Pester. This is also a debut novel, although the author has previously published a collection of short stories. And this follows a man who works in a kind of mid-level job in an office in a complex which is rapidly expanding. And one day he brings his 8-year-old daughter to work, but she disappears. And he goes on this hunt for her, even though he's told that she's safe at home, but he doesn't believe that. And he is led through this kind of maze-like structure of this business complex, which is constantly expanding, and trying to find her. And it becomes this kind of existentialist search for both his daughter and for meaning amidst this kind of corporate environment. And this book is described by the author Keith Ridgway. He says that Ben Pester renders the baffling peculiarity of employment with a subversive imagination that should get him fired. Weird, unsettling, and moving. And Keith Ridgway wrote a novel called A Shock, which I loved so much. It was one of my favorite books in the year that I read it, and it was also previously shortlisted for the Goldsmiths Prize. We Live Here Now by C.D. Rose, and this novel is about an artist who's very ambitious, who creates this installation in which a number of people vanish, including people who visit this installation, and critics and people, art gallery assistants, and possibly the artist herself vanishes into this installation. And the story follows a dozen people who are kind of loosely connected to this artwork and tells their stories. I've read that this is kind of more like a group of interconnected short stories, or maybe each of the chapters are kind of pieces of art themselves, or kind of art projects in themselves, but they are all kind of loosely connected around this art installation. And so it's about how the art world and the corporate world meet, but uses a very unique form for that. The author, Luke Kennard, says of this book that it's endlessly inventive, wickedly intelligent, funny and melancholic, reminds me, even as it upends our expectations, why we fell in love with reading in the first place. And this is a book that I never heard of before its listing on this year's award, which is partly why I love following book prizes so much. And finally, there is Helm by Sarah Hall. And this novel centers around a strong northeasterly wind in Cumbria, which is called Helm, and which becomes a character in itself in this story. But this wind also has a kind of legendary status within this area of the country, and it follows it as it interacts with a number of different characters over a long period of time. So I think sections of this book are kind of like a historical novel and bringing these different eras of time to life through these individual stories, but they're also all kind of connected through this wind. And I've read that Sarah Hall spent 20 years researching this novel, and the author Andrew Miller, who's currently on the Booker Prize shortlist, calls this a big celebratory book, in places delightfully playful, in others as tight and breathless as a thriller. And also the author Sarah Moss, who's so fantastic, says of this book that I'm odd. I wouldn't think a novel could be at once so taut and so multifarious, expanding one's sense of what fiction can do. Now, personally, I've had quite mixed responses to the fiction of Sarah Hall that I've read in the past. I've appreciated her books, but I've not fully sort of fell in love with them. So I'm hoping this novel will change my mind and make me into a Sarah Hall convert. But those are the 6 books on this year's Goldsmiths Prize shortlist. Like I said, I would love to know if you have read any of these books and your opinions about them, and if you're interested in reading any of them now, and if you have your own favorite to win this year's award, which is going to be announced on November 5th. So that'll be very exciting to see. But thank you for watching me discuss this award and these books. I hope you're doing well and reading some great experimental fiction, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.